Now, this study has found almost a third of retirees frequently feel lonely or socially isolated. The research by Age Concern found 59% of New Zealanders aged 65 and above had felt lonely recently. 30% felt that way a lot or all of the time. Chief Executive of Age Concern New Zealand is Kevin Lamb, and he said he feared New Zealand is facing a loneliness epidemic. A loneliness epidemic. He says that it also could have severe health impacts. And he joins me now. Welcome in, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks very much, Leah.
These figures make for grim reading, Kevin. Were you surprised?
Sadly, we weren't too surprised by the overall numbers. We'd always known that the level of loneliness amongst our older people was very high. I think even we were slightly surprised to find that it was quite so high as 30% of people feeling lonely and isolated most or all of the time. So I think the overall arching figures didn't surprise us. Some of the things underneath that in their report did surprise us. But overall, this is a problem that has existed for quite some time in New Zealand, and we're really not facing up to it and tackling it.
What are some of the negative health effects for those retired that are socially isolated that came up in the study?
Well, these are huge. I mean, it's both in this study and in many studies that have been done in other parts of the world, for example. We know that you can equate loneliness and isolation. It has a sort of similar impact as things like, being a heavy smoker or a heavy drinker or being morbidly obese. These are things that have real serious detrimental impacts on health and well-being. It creates far greater numbers of hospital visits, for example. If you're lonely and isolated, you don't have support around you, you're more likely to be in hospital and you're more likely to spend longer in hospital. You're also far more likely to have mental health decline. So issues around sort of early onset of dementia and other mental health issues are far more likely, as well as things like depression and things like this. And the really telling thing is it will lower life expectancy. So if you're lonely and isolated, you will simply live less than if you're not.
Kevin, is there a difference with living in your own home in retirement or a retirement village when it comes to feeling lonely? Was that in the study?
It was, and this was one of the really interesting things we found, was that you can be lonely in your own home when you're living on your own, but equally you can be lonely when you're in a crowded, busy environment. So you can be in a retirement village, and we found that a significant proportion of people in retirement villages still felt lonely on that sort of frequent basis. And I think if you think of this, it is, if you're in a crowded, busy environment, but you yourself are not involved, you're not participating, you're not connected with those around you, you're literally sitting and looking through the proverbial net curtains at all this activity just outside your window, you're not involved and you feel desperately lonely. So it's certainly living alone, you can be lonely, but you can be very lonely and isolated if you're in a busy environment, if you're not part of that environment around you.
Well, there is that saying, Kevin, is that you can still be the loneliest person in a busy room, so a crowded room. And it's interesting with the retirement homes because, according to all the advertisements I've seen, you see groups of people playing tennis, going for walks, ginsies at 5, the guys are playing pool, the women are in the, it looks like it. I mean, I've jokingly said to my husband, we should move in with them because they're having a great time.
It does. Look, I mean, understandably they provide this vision of a sort of a glorious idyll that is a perfect living environment. And look, let's not say that for some people it's a wonderful place to be, but it is not the answer for everybody.
No.
And we do know that if say for example you're in a retirement village and you're in there as a couple, but you lose your loved one, but you've never really had that sort of getting out there and engaging with the activities and you're not going to do that just because you happen to be in a retirement village any more than you potentially will do if you're in the community as a whole. And so it simply isn't the panacea. It isn't the answer to everything.
So I thought about this, Kevin, when I knew I was going to be talking to you, and I thought, we've changed the way we live over the decades. Not so many maybe generational families in one home. You used to have grandma, grandpa there, and mum and dad and the kids. And certainly there are ethnicities that still do that, Indian families, Māori Pacifica families, but in general, we do live separate lives. Do you think that's made older people lonely?
I think it's certainly a contributing factor. And certainly when we talk to people, there was a significant number of people who had children, grandchildren, but who lived in other parts of the country or lived overseas. And so they were removed and they were distant from them. And so they were lonely as of that result. Equally, though, we were talking to some people who lived in those busy, multi-generational family homes. But one of the comments they were making to us would they'd be sat in the corner of the room or in a back room. They may have to look after the very young, the children, the mokapuna, but they weren't engaged with anything else that the family was doing. So they were suffering from that same thing of they were lonely and isolated because they could see life going on and people being fully engaged and active, but they weren't involved. And so certainly I think the change in our lifestyles, it has, but it's a contributing factor, not the only factor. But one of the other things that we discovered from this report was the use of social media and a huge shift in the way we communicate and stay connected with people now through digital means. And a significant number of the older people we talked to who were actually active on social media, so almost three quarters of the people we spoke to could use and could connect on social media, but they had nobody to connect to. And so again, their window on the world was there. They were looking out, but there was nothing on the other end. And so it was interesting. One of the things that was most startling was those people who were active on social media felt increased loneliness compared to those who weren't.